Innovation, imagination, wonder. These are just some of the words used to describe Dr. Harvey Passes. Dr. Passes explores interesting people and ideas that will stimulate you. He questions the people who develop, create, and employ novel concepts in business and everyday lives. He especially loves to speak with successful people. How did they do it? How can you do it too? So let's join Dr. Harvey Passes in his quest of wonder and curiosity as we watch Dr. Harvey Passes Presents.
You like stories? Get ready for this. Sit down and listen. This is going to be part one of an amazing story, and then next week you'll get part two. Listen to this. Day before Christmas, I went to a bookstore to look for a book to read, naturally, and I'm walking around, and all of a sudden this book practically jumped up off the shelf for me to read. And I have no idea why I did that, but I picked it and I looked at the book, and I found it absolutely engrossing, compelling, engaging, relevant. And I looked at the book, and I was so thrilled by what I was reading, I then just turned it over and looked in the back, and lo and behold, I see the individual who wrote the book lives in Port Washington. I couldn't believe it. Within the hour, I was on the phone with this gentleman, and I pleaded with him, cajoled him, coerced him to be on the show so we could talk all about his incredible experiences. This man has had a life not to be believed. There's so much to talk about. We're going to start. First, I will just tell you that the name of the book is called, I'll see if we get a close-up of this, Witness to Nuremberg. And it's absolutely an amazing book. And if you can get a little closer shot, and the author's name is Richard Sonnenfeldt. And sit back and be absolutely amazed at the story that is all true that happened to Richard Sonnenfeldt. First, Richard, thank you very much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, no, you're just fantastic. Ever since I've met you, I've enjoyed sitting down and listening to you and hearing the stories you've had to explain.
Your enthusiasm was just infectious.
Well, now we both are contagious. We both have the disease. Let's begin. First, let's start by explaining. You grew up in what country? Where were you born?
I was born in Germany into a Jewish family. 1923.
1923.
My family had been citizens since the year 1800.
1800.
We lived in a small German town,
Gardelegen,
in about 9,000 inhabitants. There were 27 Jews there.
And the doctors?
There were 4 doctors there. My father was one of them. He moved there as a young idealist because the town needed a doctor. And until 1933, when Hitler came, I lived the normal life of a German boy. There were Jews there, but really none of them were observant. They were integrated with their neighbors. They did not live in clusters. They were a part of the citizenry. And then Hitler came. And with Hitler came anti-Semitism. And I won't go into detail now, but as you know, Hitler progressively made it impossible for Germans to stay there. He canceled their citizenship.
Germans or Jews?
Jews. German Jews. He canceled their citizenship. In the case of my father, he suspended the insurance payments for the patients, so my father was unable to earn a living. In 1935, his main henchman, Hermann Goering, proclaimed the Nuremberg laws, which essentially robbed the Jews of any chance to make a living in Germany. It was a calculated move to force them into immigration.
Get out.
To get out of Germany. The problem wasn't getting out of Germany. The problem was finding a place to go to. And we were lucky to have been promised a visa to come to the United States, which actually in 1937 was suspended. Most people don't know that the Roosevelt administration canceled all immigration of German Jews into America. But fortunately, my mother was able to find places for me.
And your brother?
My younger brother, 3 years younger, in an English boarding school, where I was very happy. And you must remember, I was a teenager. I was away from home. The school was co-educational. There were attractive girls there. Had a wonderful time until one morning.
Go ahead. This is what I want to hear.
What?
This is what I want to hear. One morning.
One morning in June of 1940, a Sunday morning, one of my teachers roused me, and he said, "Get dressed. You're going to camp." And I said, "I'm going to camp? I didn't ask to go to camp." He said, "You don't understand. You're going to internment camp." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, you've got the German passport with a swastika in it, and all Germans over 16 are going to be interned." To cut a long story short, I was a civilian prisoner, an internee. The British government was deported to Australia, where the mistake that they had made was discovered. I was allowed to get on a boat that was to take me back to England, but instead
Where'd
put
the
to
boat
port.
go?
Instead, the boat went to Bombay in India, where I and 6 others who were equally lucky were dumped on the pier. We had just the clothes on our back, no money, no papers, no identity, but we were turned over to the Indian police, who in turn turned us over to a Jewish Relief Committee. Cut a long story short, I spent 7 months in Bombay. I got a job, but I was fortunate enough to see the American consul, who gave me a visa to come to the United States. And the irony of the story is that 11 months after I was woken up on that Sunday morning in England by my teacher, I was in the United States, and nobody else managed to go from England to the United States because the U-boat blockade was on and there was no travel. I arrived in New York on April the 26th, 1941. And in all modest...
Let me get a picture of this. That's it?
Oh, yes.
Is that a picture? See if you can get a close-up of this. So here's a picture. Wait until you see where this story is going to go. It's absolutely going to just drop your jaw. Okay, so go ahead. So we're looking at a picture right now with you having gotten off the boat.
Well, the reporters heard about my story, and the story was that of a 17-year-old boy who had been driven out of Germany, who had a wonderful time in England, who was interned by the British, deported to Australia, released in Australia, made his own way in India, and went via South Africa and South America to New York, and arrived here, so to speak, as a world traveler at the age of 17. And so I was quite a sensation when I arrived.
When you came here, just to abbreviate this so we can get into a lot of the meat, you then wound up becoming a master electrician, the youngest in the state of Maryland, right?
Yes, it did take me, however, 2 years to get there.
Fine.
I started as a helper.
Fine. And then after that, you went on to do defense work. You did pretty well. And then one day you get a letter in the mail. And the letter says, "Greetings.
Greetings. Report to the 7th Armory
Right.
in Baltimore for induction."
Right. So now you're going into the Army. And the next thing you know, when you're ready to ship off, you're raising your right hand. And what are they doing?
Well, they said, "Raise your right hand." And 2 minutes later, I was a U.S. citizen. There was no examination. There was no checking into my background. I was a U.S. citizen. I was the first one in my family. And that was a major, major event in my life.
Okay. Now, I'm just moving it quickly because there are great things to talk about. So now you wind up going to Germany, fighting in the Battle of the Bulge and other areas as well,
Right.
putting your life on the line, having the bullets whiz by, and doing all these things. You did reconnaissance work, and et cetera, et cetera. Now the war is over. You're in Germany.
Austria.
You're in Austria.
Yes.
Okay, you're in Austria. The war is over, and you're under a truck, and you're fixing something. You're full of grease, and the lieutenant screams, "Sonnenfeldt, Sonnenfeldt." What happened?
Well, I was left behind by my unit, which was shipped back to the United States. I didn't have enough points. I was assigned to the motor pool, lying under a car with a greasy nose and black hands, and somebody yelled, "Sonnenfeld, get your butt out of here. The general needs an interpreter." And I said, "What general?" They said to me, "Don't ask any questions, get going." So I tried to wash my face and clean my hands, and there came a colonel in a beautiful garrison uniform, which I hadn't seen for many, many months since leaving the States. And he said, "Come on, we don't have time for this, the general wants you." Well, the general was Wild Bill Donovan.
Right.
He was the head
the OSS.
of the OSS,
Right.
which, as you probably remember, was the predecessor of the CIA,
Right.
because President Roosevelt wanted an impartial organization to assess intelligence for him.
And he was the head of it.
He was the head of it, and he was in Austria in order to interview some actually German resistance fighter. He was looking for future defendants in the war crimes trials and collecting evidence, but he neglected to bring an interpreter. So he said to me, "Can you speak German?" And I said, "Try me." And he spoke a few words of German, and he was happy. And I interpreted for him for about a half an hour. And when I got finished, he said, "You know, Sonnenfeld, your English is so much better than our other interpreters. I can hardly understand their accents. How would you like to come and work for me?" And I looked at him and I said, "General, where are you based?" And he said, "My base is in Paris." And I said, "I'm coming." And then I said, "When?" He said, "Right now. Get your stuff in a duffel bag, and you're coming on the plane with me."
Okay, so let's expedite it. So now he tells you what's going on. You understand what's going on. They get your suit of clothes. You're a private.
I'm a private first class.
You're a private first class. Excuse me. You're a private first class. Okay? And now here you are, and this takes us to the story of your book, which is phenomenal. Your job was to interpret what for who?
Well, at the time when General Donovan picked me up, the Nuremberg trials were still being debated. They had not been decided on. The defendants had not been named. But there was a general investigation of war criminals to find out who would be tried and for what. So I went to Paris with an OSS group who hunted down suspects. And I reviewed documents and traveled all over Europe. I interviewed possible future witnesses, future defendants, for about 2 or 3 months. And on August the 20th, 1945, by the London Agreement, there was then a decision made to hold a trial.
In Nuremberg?
No, not yet. The defendants were not known, but there was a big argument where the trial would be held. And the Russians were very insistent to have the trial in Berlin, which they controlled. But Justice Jackson, the American prosecutor, wanted the trial to be held in American-occupied territory. And it so happened that the Russians had 2 of the prospective defendants, and we had 20. And it got to be an acrimonious argument, and Justice Jackson said, "Okay, you try yours, and we'll try ours." And at that point, the Russians gave in.
And so went to Nuremberg. What was your next point? Because I want to show footage.
What?
I'm going to show footage in a minute.
Yes.
But
well,
go ahead.
Let me just explain one other brief thing about Nuremberg. Why Nuremberg? People thought it was because it was Hitler's headquarters for his annual party days. That wasn't the reason at all. There were only 2 jails in American-occupied Germany that could hold the defendants. One was in Munich and the other was in Nuremberg. But Nuremberg was the only one that had an adjacent jail in which the defendants and the witnesses could be held. And that's how Nuremberg was chosen.
Interesting. Let's take a quick look at who the defendants were, and you'll talk to us. You'll look on the monitor when we're ready, and you'll tell us. Let's roll the DVD, and we're going to see now the defendants who will be named as they're coming in. There's the courtroom.
What you're seeing there is the courtroom, and the door to a staircase to the jail is opened.
Who's
and
that?
The number one defendant, Hermann Goering,
Okay.
Hitler's named successor.
He was Hitler's successor. Who's that's walked in after him?
That is Admiral Dönitz, commander of the German Navy. This is Rudolf Hess, HESS, prominent once as Hitler's deputy. This is Admiral Raeder. And by the way, they're walking in pretty much in the order in which they were named in the indictments.
Right.
Who's
this?
This is Ribbentrop, who was the foreign minister.
They're acting as if it's a coffee party.
The man behind them is Schirach, who headed the Hitler Youth. This man is General Keitel, Hitler's chief of staff. This man is Saukel, in charge of slave labor.
Slave labor, look at this.
This is Schacht. You can just see him walk there. Schacht, the most arrogant of the defendants. This man is Frank, governor of Poland. Funk, president of the Reichsbank.
It's a cameraman?
Cameraman.
Who's this?
This looks to me like Mr. Von Papen.
Von Papen, right. He handed things over to Hitler.
Who was famous as a snake. And as you can see, here's Speer, who was later the munitions minister.
He was the architect, and then became in charge of munitions. Who was this gentleman?
That is von Neurath, who was foreign minister. Seyss-Inquart, who was the Austrian Nazi who delivered Austria. I can't place.
That's Stryker? Who's walking in now? No, in the back.
That is Stryker walking in, the bald-headed man.
And I think.
Anyway, you see them all come in. This is Jodl, who was the deputy chief of staff, and I believe he was the last one of the 20 to take his place in the courtroom.
Great. So that's
this man here is Kaltenbrunner, the SS and Gestapo chief.
Okay, we can cut it now. Thank you. Okay, so those are the defendants, and they were being tried. And you had spent a lot of time speaking with these individuals personally, and tell us the experience that you had when you were with Colonel John Amon, who was the chief interrogator, and you met Hermann Goering for the first time, and he walks into the room. What happened?
Well, I was a little nervous, to tell you the truth. He was head of the German Luftwaffe. He was in charge of the German economy. He really issued the order for the Holocaust. He was a robber baron. He was a criminal of the first order. But he was also a charming man, and he had the reputation of being able to intimidate and confuse the interpreters by interrupting them. And there I sat with Colonel Amon, who was the chief interrogator.
Who was the prosecutor for Murder Incorporated years ago.
Here in Brooklyn.
Right.
We were waiting, and we heard shuffling footsteps, and here came Goering. He was being weaned from drugs, but there was still an aura of authority about him. And so Colonel Amon started and first put me under oath to translate everything completely, honestly, and then turned to Goering and said, "Do you swear, Hermann Goering, that what you're about to testify will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. At which point Goering interrupted me and said, first, I want to know, am I before the judge? They didn't know who was questioning, what was happening. And Eamon noticed that Goering interrupted me, and he whispered to me, and he said, don't let this turkey interrupt you. And here was I, the private, facing the field marshal, the general field marshal of the German
number
army.
2 man.
And I was put on the spot. He said to me in so many words, discipline him.
And you were 23.
I was 23.
You were a Jew growing up in Nazi Germany, fearful of everything, having learned everything, and you're becoming intimidated, and now he's telling you, give it back to him.
Right. And however, the aura of his power still clung to him, even though he was a prisoner. But there entered my head an old joke, which was a joke on his name. And the joke was to call him Gerink instead of Goering, and the word Gerink means a little nothing.
Little nothing.
And I said to him, Herr Gerink, when I speak, you don't interrupt me. You wait until I'm finished. And when I'm finished and you have something to say, you say it. And then I will decide whether or not it's worthwhile repeating it. Do you understand that? And he looked at me and he said, Mein Name ist nicht Gerink.
My name is
My name is not Gerink. My name is Goering. And I said to him, I tell you what, Herr Goering, I'll make a deal with you. If you don't interrupt me again, I won't call you Goering again. At which point he had a big smile on his face, and you must understand his German sense of orderliness was now satisfied. He was the chief defendant, Eamon was the chief interrogator, and I was the chief interpreter. So everything was an apple pie order. As a matter of fact, I became his favorite interpreter. He wouldn't speak to anybody but me.
Unbelievable. Here's Hitler's deputy in the room with you. Let's get a picture, close-up of this. Here's a picture of you with Rudolf Hess. And we can take a look at this shot in the room. And, okay, you are right over here. You can see a part of your head. And there's...
the stenographer.
There's Hess. And there's Colonel Eamon.
Right.
Okay, and there's
Colonel
the stenographer.
Brookhart. Colonel Brookhart, his assistant, the stenographer, sits behind the woman.
Right.
Is the stenographer.
Right. Anyway, I just wanted to show this. So there you are in the room. Thank you. And going over all of this and speaking with him, then you handed them the indictments to all of the prisoners.
Yeah, well, the indictment was formulated on October the 19th.
Right.
And it was formulated by the Allied Control Council.
Right.
Which was the organization that has assumed all powers over Germany, legislative, executive, and judicial. And the indictment named 20 defendants. It was drawn up in Berlin. It was sent to Nuremberg. And a British major, Major Neve, and I were delegated to hand out the indictments individually to each of the defendants on October the 20th. And I remember very well, it was 3 o'clock on the afternoon of October the 20th, a very gloomy day, and I was told to report immediately to Colonel Williams' office. He was our operations officer, and he said, hold up your right hand. And I thought to myself, what now? And he said, do you swear that you will accurately translate the indictments that you and Major Neve are going to hand out to the defendants this afternoon? And I said, I do.
Right.
So Major Neve and I had a little table and a little chair, which we set up in front of the cell of each of the defendants, and we read the entire indictment to them. The indictment was about 24 pages, and the procedure took many, many hours. But I have a clear impression of the reaction.
Well, hold on one second. You're not going to believe this. We only have 3 minutes left.
What?
We only have 3 minutes left on the show right now. Very quickly, give me quick answers. Why weren't Hitler, Himmler, Bormann, and Goebbels presented with indictments?
They were dead.
They were dead. Okay. How did they? Well, Bormann disappeared. What about the rest of them?
Well,
How did they die? Briefly.
All suicides.
Suicide.
Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler.
And let me see, I have a very interesting photo here. And what happened? Here's two pictures here of Hermann Göring. First, let's show a picture of him walking into the courtroom. Here's a picture of Hermann Göring, Hitler's number 2 man, walking into the courtroom. Come on, let's get the camera going there. Thank you. And here he is walking in. And then, what did he do? He was supposed to be hung, right? He was supposed to be hanged.
He was supposed to be hung.
Okay. What did he do?
He took a cyanide capsule and
he committed suicide.
Mystery to this day where he hid it and how he got it.
And there he is dead.
He committed suicide
Thank you.
About an hour before he was to be hung.
He took the coward's way out. He took the coward's way out. It's absolutely amazing. So there's so much more to talk about, and I guess we're going to do a next show. And we'll go into this, and then I want to go into your opinions, your evaluations, because you had first-hand knowledge. You didn't just hear about this. You met these people. And you explained to me how Göring said it was easy to take over the country. It was easy to take over Germany. And he explained how it was done. I mean, this is amazing. People have to know this. They've got to learn about this, how these things can happen. And how could this have happened in Germany? And Germany was a forward-thinking country. So you're not going to go anywhere. I hope you're going to stay with us because we're going to do a second show because we're almost out of time. But I would love very much for you to sign my copy of the book. I appreciate you very much, Richard Sonnenfeldt, coming down here to talk about part 1 before we get into part 2. And I appreciate the things that you went through in life were just incredible. And while you're busy signing the book, I'd like the people at home to know that when the war was over, this gentleman took part in creating color television. Then from there, he went on to work at NBC as executive vice president. And then from there, he went on to work with NASA, the moon landing. And then from there, he went on to invent different various things and helping newspapers to be able to be printed in a more technologically advanced way, and served on the board of numerous corporations in America. This is a man who just has had the most unbelievable experiences in life, and no matter when he's thrown down, he lands on his feet, which was just so far. So far. You're an amazing man. In the short time that I've known you, I've learned so much from you, and that's the greatest compliment, Richard, that I can pay you.
Thank you very much.
I'm absolutely glad to know you, and I want to thank you very much.
And I've autographed
but I want to shake your hand. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's excellent, and I'll treasure the book in my library. Absolutely. We're just out of time. We got seconds left. So we're going to do our next show, and stay put. And I just want you to know that same time next week, please stay put. And you're going to see the conclusion of this marvelous interview with Richard Sonnenfeldt, witness to Nuremberg, and to see exactly what happened with all these unbelievable, horrific people, and his experiences, and then his interpretations, so that we can all learn. So until next week, Dr. Pass is saying, with Richard Sonnenfeldt, take care of yourself, and think, and listen all around you, so that you don't make the same mistakes that other people did in the past. See you again soon.
Pleasure.
This is part 2 of a show that is absolutely just fantastic. If you missed part 1, I'm going to fill you in because there's a lot to go over. And sit down, relax for a little bit. You're about to be very impressed. In the first show, I introduced an individual called Richard Sonnenfeldt. This gentleman was born in Germany and then wound up when he was 17 being sent on a boat out of, first from Germany, he went to England when he was 15, and then at 17 he went on a boat and first was put in an internment camp from the English, and then from there put on a boat into a penal colony. When they realized that he didn't belong there, that he was Jewish, they sent him back to England, didn't make it to England, wound up going to Bombay, India. This was now in 1940. And from Bombay, India, he wound up getting a job, and then from there got on a boat, wound up getting a visa to come into the United States, met up with his family, obviously also Jews, and he wound up living in the United States, and then he wound up being inducted into the United States Army to go back to Germany to fight in World War II, the Battle of the Bulge and other places. At the end of the war, as things worked out, he became the chief interpreter for the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. And the story he tells in his new book called, I'll use this one here, Witness to Nuremberg, is just absolutely amazing. Read the book, blown away by it, call him up on the phone. He lives right here in Port Washington, and he graciously accepted to come on the show, and you're going now to see and learn all about what happened because he spoke to all these Nazi war criminals firsthand as the chief interpreter at Nuremberg. So now, first, I want to reintroduce you to Richard Sonnenfeldt. Richard, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you back. Okay, so now let's continue. So you were speaking with all these people. We were discussing about your interrogation and translation going on with Göring and the rest, and with Hess. Let's go on a little bit here. Before I get into, I want to spend about maybe 5 to 8 minutes going into some of your stories. Then I want to go into your opinion, your interpretation. How could this have occurred? How could these people have done this? How was it allowed? Let's go back to a couple little stories here. Your father was a doctor in a town called Gardelegen in Germany. Yes, and there's only like 27 Jews, 9,000 Lutherans. They're in this town roughly. Okay? Yes. And your father was then whisked away and put into a concentration camp.
Yeah, on Crystal Night.
Crystal Night.
It was Crystal Night.
And what happened?
And what happened, by that time, my brother and I were in school in England. We got a telegram that he was in concentration camp. And 2 days later, we got a telegram that he was back home.
He was back home.
He was back home.
How did he get out of home? How did he get out of a concentration camp?
I didn't find that out why until I was at Nuremberg. And there we found a document where Hermann Göring, who was capable in equal measure of murderous deeds and little good works, had seen the names of some Jews who during World War I had won the Iron Cross decoration. And he said it's not right for these people to be in concentration camp. And he issued an order that all of those who'd earned an Iron Cross were to be released. And my father had been a doctor through the entire First World War and had an Iron Cross, and he was released, but with the condition. The condition was to abandon all of his properties in Germany. They get out in April, and the only problem was he had no place to go.
Okay, so very, 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 very fascinating. You spoke to all of these people, all of these war criminals, and then you spoke to others. You traveled around a little bit. Tell us the story of first. Who is Franz Zereis?
Franz Zereis was the commandant of a concentration camp called Mauthausen in Austria. It was relatively little known. It was a small camp, except it was exceptionally known for its cruelties. There only about 200,000 people were killed as compared to 3.5 million in Auschwitz. And we went to Mauthausen to interrogate them in the period when we were looking for witnesses. He had attempted to flee, was mortally wounded, but I got to speak to his son, a two-headed kid. Could have been one of your children, one of my children, blonde, open, blue eyes. And I said to him, "How did you get along with your father?" Oh, he says, I got along a lot with him except for one thing. I said, what was that? Well, he said, on my 10th birthday.
10th birthday?
10th birthday. He bought me a 22 caliber rifle. And he got 6 prisoners and he lined them up. And I had to shoot until they were dead. And that I didn't like.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Amazing, these stories. Now, von Ribbentrop. Who is he, and what was your impression of von Ribbentrop?
Von Ribbentrop was the German foreign minister who was famous for greeting the King of England with the Heil Hitler salute. I called him the babbling idiot.
Why was he the babbling idiot?
Well, he never once said anything that made any sense. He talked endlessly about things that did not up. And I once asked his deputy, the father of a future German president, Baron von Weizsäcker, how is it that this demented idiot could have been foreign minister of Germany? And he said the explanation is very easy. Hitler did all the talking. He never listened.
No joke. No joke. Who was General Keitel?
General Keitel was Hitler's chief of staff. He was a general feldmarschall. He replaced actually his father-in-law Blomberg, who called him nothing but a postman. He was a lackey, and his nickname was La Keitel, which is a German
slang.
It's a German. What would you call
phrase,
it?
A lackey.
Yeah, it's a phrase on lackey. He had another name. It was called the Nick Esel. And Nick Esel is a German toy of a donkey that nods when you step on his tail.
He just nods like this. So that was him.
That was him, and he was there. He simply listened to Hitler and put his words into orders. But before he finally was hung, he made a confession. He said he now realized that he should have stopped things that he could have stopped, and that came after he had listened to the testimony of concentration camp commandants and others in the trial. He was an ignorant yes man.
A yes man who paid the final price.
He paid the final price.
Tell me the story of you, first of all, who was Franz Halder, and then tell me the story about how you got on the floor with him.
Franz Halder was Hitler's chief of staff in
Hitler's chief of staff.
Chief of the general staff in the invasion of Russia.
Invasion of Russia. Now, how did you get on the floor with him, and why?
Well, Franz Halder was cashiered by Hitler after he ordered the retreat from Moscow. You remember? Mm-hmm. The Germans got near Moscow and retreated.
Which Hitler did not want.
Which Hitler did not want. He thought that advance forever, go was the way to go. Franz Halder was hurt. He was hurt. He wanted to prove that he was a better strategist than Hitler. And he told me about the Battle of Moscow. And he told me in such graphic terms that I bought him hundreds of toy soldiers. And he and I went on the carpet, and he illustrated to me the course of the Battle of Moscow and how he could have won it. And I don't think there was ever any other American Army private who got a lesson on Blitzkrieg from Hitler's top general.
It's amazing, all because of your ability to speak German fluently and to understand the idioms.
Well, and also being sympathetic to him and his stories. He was a weak man.
It's amazing. Who was Rudolf, not Hess, but Heuss?
Höss. Rudolf Höss was the commandant of Auschwitz.
Not to be confused with Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's deputy. One is H-O-E-S-S, and the other is H-E-S-S.
Right.
Okay, I want to make that clear.
Often confused because of same first name.
Right.
Rudolf Höss did not fall into our hands until April of 1946, 10 months after the war was over. And he was brought to Nuremberg as a witness.
Who was he?
He was the commandant of Auschwitz who who had been a convicted criminal. He had killed in the period of civil war or near civil war in Germany before Hitler came. He was hired by the SS as a chauffeur and was famed for his ability to follow orders in advance to be the commandant of Auschwitz. And the first question I asked him, Herr Hess, is it true that you killed 3.5 million people in Auschwitz?
I love this. Go ahead.
And he was very annoyed with me. He said, that is not true. It was only 2.5 million.
It's only 2.5 million, not 3.5 million.
Not 3.5 million.
So what happened to the other million?
What happened to the other billion? Well, he said they died from epidemics and general weakness. I had another episode with him I'll be very brief about. He once caught some of his SS guards stealing gold that had been derived from the teeth of the victims. And he sent them to a special concentration camp for SS men. He told me that was much worse than Auschwitz because there they beat them. And I looked at Hess and I said, Herr Hess, did it ever occur to you to enrich yourself from the possessions of your inmates? And he said to me, Für was halten Sie mich? What kind of a man do you think I am? Hess was a pure robot who was trained to accept orders and to pass them on.
There's so much to talk about, and you're such a wealth of information. I want to take some time right now and get into your evaluation, your interpretation, your understanding. First, what kind of a country was Germany before World War I? Was it an advanced country? Was it backward? How did the people live?
It had the reputation of being a cultured, advanced country,
right.
In which the citizens did well. And Germany, as you know, in the Versailles Treaty, was accused of starting World War unilaterally. I think the story was a little more complicated, but Germany lost the First World War. And after that, there was street fighting, close to civil war, unrest in Germany. Germany became a republic, the so-called Weimar Republic.
Which was a democratic government at the time. Or was it quasi?
So-called, a quasi-democratic government. And I want to read you a quote from Speer,
Albert
Speer, who got off with 20 years of prison instead of being hanged at Nuremberg. And he wrote in his memoirs, and he wrote about his school time, which was in the interim between Imperial Germany, which ended in 1918, and the start of Hitler, which was in 1933. And he wrote, in school, there could be no criticism of course or subject matter, let alone of the ruling powers of the state. Unconditional faith in the authority of the school was required. It never even occurred to us to doubt the order of things, for as students we were subjected to the dictates of a virtually absolute system. Moreover, there were no subjects, such as sociology or civics, which might have sharpened our political judgments. It seems to me essential to point out these lacks, as a result of which a whole generation was without defenses when exposed to Hitler. And what he points out was the superficial nature of the so-called Weimar Republic. 20% of the electorate were communists. 33% of the electorate were Nazis. And in between them, you had the parties of the middle. And the country was so baffled that it elected Hindenburg, the commander-in-chief of the German armed forces during World War I, twice as president for 6-year terms. And Hindenburg ran through a number of candidates for Reichskanzler the chief of the German cabinet, and eventually his conservative supporters convinced him to appoint Hitler to give him a chance to fail like the others. And they said after that we can have a good conservative government. Well, Hitler didn't fail. 3 weeks after he came to power, the Reichstag building, the home of the German parliament, went up in flames. And Hitler convinced Hindenburg that that was the start of a communist uprising. And he got Hindenburg to confer on him absolute powers.
Hold it 1 second. Who jokingly admitted that he started the fire?
Nobody.
I thought Hermann Göring made that comment once when he was drunk.
Yes, jokingly, and I will come to that.
Okay.
But at the time, the fire was blamed on the communists, and Hindenburg conferred absolute powers on Hitler. And Hitler used these powers first to arrest and murder all of his significant political opponents until he was left with a quorum in the parliament which gave him a majority of the remaining people. And he then abolished all political parties in Germany.
Knocked out all the parties and just left Nazis.
Just have Nazis as the only party. He canceled the power of the courts to interfere with or stop his actions. He removed all suspects, all political suspects from the civil service. And by the end of 1933, he was in absolute control of Germany. His henchman for that was Göring. And it's always been suspected that Göring may have set the fire because a list of those that were murdered and that were put in concentration camp existed days before the fire. And General Halder, the same one who taught me about the Battle of Moscow, also told me that he'd heard Göring brag that I am the one who lit the Reichstag, at which Göring blushed. And Halder said, well, he was probably a little tipsy. But there's always been a question how that fire started.
Mm-hmm.
In 1935, Hitler promulgated the Nuremberg laws, which ended the civil rights of Jews.
Right.
Hindenburg had died in 1934. Hitler assumed the powers of the chief of state, commander of the armed forces, extracted a personal oath of loyalty from all civil servants, and the judiciary was in absolute control. In 1936, he occupied the Rhineland.
Explain, the Rhineland was the northern part of Germany where a lot of industry was.
The western part of Germany,
okay.
Which under the Versailles Treaty
not supposed to
had been declared as a demilitarized zone. Hitler marched just 2 battalions of infantry into the Rhineland and occupied it, and France and England twiddled their thumbs. That was the last moment where anybody could have removed Hitler. And
could they have done it if they wanted to?
The French and the British could have.
They had the power.
They had the power. They appeased them.
And they just appeased them. Okay.
They not only appeased them, they hoped that Hitler would be a counterweight to Stalin, who was a communist menace in Russia. And I talked to Speer and Göring about this episode, who were with Hitler at the time. And they said they were shaking in their boots because they realized that the French and the British had it in their power to remove Hitler. He then rearmed Germany, he took Austria, and he took Czechoslovakia. And in 1939, Hitler made a speech telling the Germans all of the wonderful things that he'd done for them.
Let's talk about this speech because it's very fascinating. But before you continue, I want to give it one little backdrop. During that same period of time, the United States was in the middle of a deep depression, and it was terrible. But Germany's depression was far worse.
Was far worse.
People have to know that.
Percentage-wise.
Right.
Because it was exacerbated by the Treaty of Versailles, which superimposed on the depression payments for
Reparations.
for Germany.
Right, so Germany was really just in terrible straits.
In terrible shape, always on the verge of civil war.
And Hitler was able to give its populace jobs and money from the government. Is that correct?
He used,
work programs.
He used deficit spending with make work programs, and later, after the occupation of the Rhineland, spent money on rearmament. And by 1939, Germany was the most powerful country in Europe. And Hitler said, I took over a nation
This is the
in
speech.
distress.
Tell the speech.
Well, he made a speech which was broadcast on the German radio nationwide. He said in 1933, we had a country on the verge of civil war. We had unemployment. The peasants were afraid of losing their land. We were a play toy in the hands of the other nations. And today we are the strongest nation in Europe. There's no unemployment. The people had money in their pockets. We have reacquired the lands that were taken from us as a result of losing the First World War. On and on and on, praising himself, and he says, I have done all this. And that was a moment where Hitler, had he then stopped, could have been acclaimed to be the greatest statesman that Germany had ever had, possibly one of the greatest statesmen of the world. But he couldn't stop. He did not wish to be dependent in any way on other countries for imports. And Germany needed iron ore, and Germany needed food. And rather than negotiate with these countries, he set out to conquer them. And Ribbentrop, whom I called the babbling idiot, assured him that he could take Poland like he'd taken Czechoslovakia and Austria without going to war. But unfortunately for Hitler, when he invaded Poland, England and France declared war, and he yelled at Ribbentrop because now he knew he had a war on his hand. And what to do? Well, Hitler was a military genius. There's no question about it. He knew more about the armaments and the psychology and the training of his enemy armies, and the result was the conquest of Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Holland, and France in 1940. He was the absolute master of Europe, except the British managed to save their troops at Dunkirk. And Hitler has been generally blamed for that because he issued orders to his armor not to demolish the British bridgehead at Dunkirk, but to leave it to Goering's Air Force to destroy the evacuation fleet. And the stupid Germans thought that the British would send big ships, 5, 6, 10 big ships to evacuate their troops, and instead they sent hundreds of small troops, and their troops got away. And after that, Hitler had a war that was undecided on his hand. He tried the Battle of Britain, which, as you know, he lost. Mm-hmm. And so it was stalemated. So the next year then, out of frustration or out of a lust for conquest, he invaded Russia. Mm. And that was his final mistake. And from there on in, followed defeat until he wound up in the bunker. But I have talked to his chauffeur, to his pilot, to people who were with him in the bunker.
Yes.
And Hitler was literally the emperor without clothes. He commanded armies that didn't exist anymore. He wreaked upon Germany the worst kind of destruction. Its cities were destroyed. What people don't realize that in addition to the terrible, terrible crimes of the Holocaust, which cost at least 5, possibly 6 million lives, 12 million Germans were killed in this war. Altogether, 50 million people were killed in Europe. And Hitler, in the end, of course, committed suicide. But here's a story of a man who had it within his hands, within his grasp, to be the most famous statesman that Germany had ever seen, could only he have stopped in 1939, because by that time only about 100 Jews had been killed. 250,000 of the original 500,000 in Germany had emigrated, and neither Germany nor the rest of the world would have held that against him had he then stopped and simply been the master of a rejuvenated, empowered Germany.
But he just took it beyond. He took it beyond. We got, you're not going to believe this, we got like a minute and a half left. It's amazing the time goes. The concern is that these things could happen again if an individual, you told me that Goring expressed, it's easy to take over a country. Once you've got the press, you've got the media, you make a big lie, you find someone.
You blame the pacifists.
Blame the pacifists. And just keep pushing them. But these people were not people of quality, all the people you met. They were thugs.
They were thugs. They were people who would have never amounted anything in ordinary life. They were all yes men. They were sycophants. They followed Hitler to get a uniform on their back, to get rank, and to get power. The exceptions would be Schacht, who was a financial genius without morals, Speer, who was an exceedingly clever man, who never admitted his moral failures.
He used slave labor as well.
But as I quoted him, after his imprisonment in Spandau, it had very good insights about the faults of the Nazi system, and he exposed them in court, which in my opinion saved him from hanging.
Unbelievable. I'm sorry that I can't spend more time talking with you right now because we're out of time and the tape will just run right out.
We could go on and on and on.
You know what? And we will, you and I off camera, other times. I would love to. You're an absolute delight. The best thing I can say to you, best compliment is that I learned something from you. That's my best compliment.
Well, and I have to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I wish we had more time.
Well, we will. We'll have some more time. You're welcome back anytime you want to talk about other things, your insights, your thoughts, and other things in your life. Your life has been an extraordinary life. So many things. And I'm sure people would love to hear more about it. And your book is wonderful.
You may regret that over.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Richard
Sonnenfeldt, author of Witness to Nuremberg. Great book, great book. I want to thank you very much. And I want to thank you very much. I hope you got a lot out of today's show. And we'll see you again next time. And in the meantime, think about all of this. And when people get up and they speak, listen, think. Don't just yes people. Don't just go along with the pact, as they did in Germany during the war. Think and see if it makes sense to you. Would you agree with it? Let's prevent things like this from happening in the future. It could happen anywhere. It could even happen here. Dr. Pass is saying so long for now. Take care. Be healthy and happy.